The rain lashed against the broken window, her children shivering with cold. A widow was forced to turn an abandoned windmill into their only possible home. But she never imagined that, deep within that forgotten structure, a treasure awaited to rewrite her destiny. The wind moaned a mournful song, whipping the windmill's rusted sails and making the entire structure creak. Inside that precarious refuge, Anna held her children with all the strength she had left, feeling the tremor of their small bodies against hers. The cold was a relentless enemy, seeping through every crack, every fissure in the stone, and the night's darkness seemed to swallow them whole. Anna's stomach rumbled in protest, a sound muffled by the wind's symphony, but her children's hunger was an even sharper pain in her chest. She promised herself, whispering against her youngest son's soft hair, that she would make that place a home, no matter the cost. At dawn, with the first pale rays of sun peeking through the cracks, Anna rose. Every muscle ached, every bone protested, but the sight of her children's sleeping faces gave her renewed strength. She had to act. The mill was a chaos of dust, cobwebs, and centuries of debris. The smell of mold and earth was dense, but Anna ignored the discomfort and began to work. She swept the stone floor with a branch she found, the friction of dry leaves against the stones, creating a harsh, continuous sound. She cleaned the walls with torn pieces of cloth, trying to remove the thick layer of grime that covered them. Her eyes, accustomed to the darkness, began to notice the details of the structure. One wall in particular seemed more fragile, with loose stones and a deep crack that stretched from floor to ceiling. The wind whistled more intensely there, almost like a lament. Determined to prevent the wall from collapsing on them, Anna decided it would be her first renovation project. She pushed a loose stone, feeling sand and dust fall. The hollow sound that followed made her heart leap. She tapped the adjacent stone with the palm of her hand, and the same sound resonated, an echo that didn't match the expected solidity of a stone wall. A spark of curiosity, long dormant, ignited within her. With rough, calloused hands, Anna began to remove the loose stones more carefully. The effort was immense, her muscles burned, and sweat streamed down her face. The scraping of stones against each other filled the small space. Slowly, one by one, the stones yielded, revealing not the mill's internal structure, but a dark, rectangular opening. Anna stopped, her breath caught in her throat. Cold, stagnant air blew from the opening, bringing with it a strange smell of old paper and something metallic. With her heart pounding in her chest, she extended a trembling hand and fumbled inside. Her fingers touched something smooth and cold, then something soft and dusty. She pulled, and a dark wooden box covered in dust emerged into the faint light. The creak of the old wood sounded loud in the mill's silence. With hesitant hands, Anna opened the box. Inside, there were not only yellowed parchments sealed with wax, but also a sparkle that made her eyes widen. Jewels. Pearl necklaces that shimmered with a soft luster, gold rings set with precious stones that caught the sunlight and refracted it into 1,000 colors, bracelets that seemed to have come from a fairy tale, and beneath it all, stacks of gold coins and banknotes piled and tied in bundles. The jingle of the coins mingled with the sound of the wind, which now seemed to sing a different melody, a song of hope. Anna recoiled, stumbling, the heavy treasure chest in her hands. She looked at the treasure and then at her children, who still slept peacefully, oblivious to the turn their lives had just taken. The mill, that place of hardship and desolation, was in fact a secret vault, a gift from the past. The tears she thought had dried forever streamed warm down her face, but they were not tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of disbelief, of relief, of an overwhelming hope she didn't know she was still capable of feeling. That treasure was not just wealth, it was the promise of a future, of dignity, of a new beginning for her and her children. Anna couldn't move for long minutes. The jingle of the coins seemed like an angelic choir that muffled the wind's lament outside, and the gleam of the jewels danced in her eyes, reflecting the pale light that barely entered through the cracks. She knelt, the open chest before her, the smell of ancient metal and aged paper filling the air. Her children continued to sleep, oblivious to the miracle unfolding just a few feet from them. Disbelief was a knot in her throat, mixed with an overwhelming wave of relief and gratitude. With an effort, Anna closed the chest, the click of the latch reverberating in the silence. She couldn't leave it exposed. Her eyes swept the mill, searching for a safer place. The same opening in the wall, which once seemed like a breach in her misery, was now a sanctuary. Carefully, she pushed the chest back into its hiding place, feeling the weight of responsibility and hope. Then, one by one, she replaced the stones, fitting them with a precision that urgency granted her. The scraping of the stones sounded again, but now it was a sound of protection, not discovery. When the wall was sealed again, Anna sat on the cold floor, exhausted, but with an energy she had never felt before. Her hands still trembled. She needed to understand. She pulled a bundle of documents from the opening that she had noticed at the bottom of the hiding place. They were yellowed parchments, some sealed with a crest she didn't recognize, others written in elegant ancient calligraphy. The smell of old paper was strong. With the weak morning light intensifying, Anna began to read. The words danced before her eyes, but with effort, she deciphered the writing. They were letters and a will. Anna's heart pounded in her chest as she read about her great-grandfather, a man of vision and cunning, who had foreseen the greed and injustice that would befall his lineage. He had been a prosperous merchant, but his wealth had been the target of envy. To protect his family's future, he had built the mill, not just as a point of trade, but as a vault. He knew that in times of adversity, the most despised place would be the safest. The treasure was an inheritance, carefully guarded for the moment a descendant desperately needed it. The will detailed the ownership of the mill and all its assets, specifically for the heir who inhabited it in extreme need. The last letter, written in a more recent and familiar hand, was from her grandmother, confirming the story and expressing the hope that the treasure would be found by someone who truly deserved a new beginning. The pieces fell into place. The mill was not a punishment, but a providence. The humiliation, the poverty, the expulsion, all of it, unbeknownst to her, had led her directly to her inheritance. Tears returned, but now they were tears of a silent, profound joy. The sun was already high when her children began to stir, small murmurs of hunger and cold. Anna stood up, her mind buzzing with plans. She couldn't simply go out buying everything, drawing attention. Discretion was key, but the first thing, the most urgent, was food. Carefully, she removed only a few stones again, the soft, familiar scrape. She pulled out a small bundle of banknotes and a few gold coins, feeling their pleasant weight in her hands. She reassembled the wall, adjusting the stones with an artisan's precision. From that moment on, the mill would not just be a shelter. It would be the heart of her new life, a secret kept within its stone walls. A secret that would transform the humiliated widow into the mistress of her own destiny. The wind outside continued to blow, but now to Anna it seemed to whisper promises of a bright future. Anna felt the weight of the coins in her hands, a sensation as strange as it was welcome. The soft jingle of the gold contrasted with the expectant silence of the mill, where her children still slept. The promise of a bright future echoed in her mind, but the reality of the present was the hunger that gnawed at their stomachs. Discretion was her new shadow, and Anna knew that every step needed to be calculated. She waited until the sun was higher, warming the mill's chilly air a little. She woke her children, who stretched with groans of tiredness. "I'm going to the village," Anna said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I need a few things. Stay here and don't go out." The boy's eyes widened. It was the first time she had risked leaving them alone in the mill, but the urgency was greater than the fear. With the small amount of copper coins and a few crumpled notes hidden in the pocket of her worn dress, Anna set off. The path to the village was long and dusty. The wind whistled in her ears, and the smell of wet earth mingled with the distant aroma of hearth smoke. As she approached the first houses, she felt the curious and disdainful glances of the neighbors. Some turned their faces, others whispered, and a muffled laugh reached her ears. Anna kept her head high, her eyes fixed on the ground, feigning the same misery as always. In the small grocery store, the old man, with his stained apron and a smoking pipe, barely greeted her. "Come to beg again, Anna?" His voice was harsh, the sound of familiar disdain. "No, sir," she replied, her voice firm, surprising herself with her own courage. "I've come to buy." The man raised an eyebrow, his pipe swaying. Anna placed some copper coins and a crumpled note on the counter. The jingle of the metal drawing attention. They weren't the gold coins from the treasure, but enough to buy the essentials. She asked for fresh bread, cheese, some fruit, and a piece of smoked meat. The smell of the fresh food was intoxicating, and her stomach rumbled in anticipation. While the grocer weighed the items, Anna noticed a small, rusty but still functional cast-iron wood stove leaning in a corner. It was perfect for the mill. "How much for that stove?" she asked, pointing. The man laughed, a dry sound. "That? Nobody wants it. I can make you a price since you have money today." Anna negotiated, using a few more notes. The price was fair for such a despised item. She also bought a thick blanket and a small axe. The grocer looked at her with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Are you fixing yourself up, widow?" he asked, his voice tinged with scorn. "Just trying to survive like all of us," Anna replied with a forced smile. Carrying everything back to the mill was an arduous task. The stove was too heavy for her alone, so Anna paid a young cart driver to take it to the base of the mill, asking him to leave the load there and depart without a fuss. The creak of the wheels on the dirt road was the only sound accompanying her effort. She carried the food and the blanket, then returned to drag the heavy stove to the mill's entrance. The friction of iron against stone, making a scraping noise. When the children saw the bread and fruit, their eyes lit up. The smell of smoked meat filled the mill, and the first decent lunch they had had in weeks was devoured in silence, only the sound of chewing filling the air. The new blanket, soft and warm, was a blessing against the cold that still insisted on penetrating. In the afternoon, Anna began to install the small stove. With the axe, she broke some dry branches she found near the mill, the crack of the wood echoing. She lit the fire, and the radiating heat was an immediate relief. The smell of wood smoke, which was once a reminder of a lost home, was now a promise of comfort. As the mill slowly transformed, Anna felt a new strength growing within her. The humiliation still burned, but now it was a fire that propelled her, not consumed her. She had a secret, a hidden power, and the wisdom to use it with caution. The mill, once a symbol of her misfortune, was becoming her sanctuary, and within it, the humiliated widow began to chart, with each small improvement, the path to her dignity and her children's prosperity. The wind outside, which once moaned laments, now seemed to sing a song of renewal, a constant murmur of a future that, though still uncertain, was full of hope. The warmth of the wood stove was a gentle embrace Anna hadn't felt in a long time. The smell of smoke, once an echo of loss, now promised comfort and a new beginning. The wind's whistle outside was still present, but it was no longer a lament. It was a melody of persistence, a constant reminder that life, even in the most desolate mill, could find a new rhythm. Anna woke before dawn. The thick blanket had kept her warm through the night, and for the first time in months she had slept deeply. Her children still slept, their faces serene in the dim light. The crackle of burning wood in the stove was the only sound breaking the silence. She rose carefully, feeling renewed energy in her muscles. There was much to do. The first task of the day was to ensure that the newfound warmth didn't escape through the countless cracks. Using the small axe, she broke more dry branches, the crack of the wood echoing softly. With her hands protected by old rags, she mixed damp earth with straw, creating a sticky paste. Patiently, she began to seal the cracks in the stone walls, the scraping of earth against rock filling the air. It was slow, dirty work, but every sealed crack was a victory against the cold. As she worked, Anna thought, discretion was key. She couldn't simply appear in the village in new clothes and an haughty attitude. The change had to be gradual, almost imperceptible. The mill needed to transform from within before anything could change on the outside. When the sun rose in the sky, the boys woke up. The smell of fresh bread and smoked meat warmed on the stove made them smile. "Mama, it's so warm," said the youngest, his eyes shining. That sparkle, so long absent, was Anna's true treasure. After breakfast, Anna decided to explore more of the mill's interior. There was a spiral wooden staircase leading to the upper floor. Where the mill's mechanisms lay rusted and still, the creak of the wood under her feet was a ghostly sound. Upstairs, the view was wide, but the wind entered through every opening. She found some loose planks, and with the axe began to loosen the most damaged ones. The hollow sound of the wood detaching. Her idea was to use the wood to create a table and perhaps a simple bench for meals. In the afternoon, Anna made a second trip to the village, this time with a slightly larger amount of copper and silver coins, carefully selected from the treasure so as not to arouse suspicion. She bought cold, hardy vegetable seeds, a roll of thick fabric for curtains, and more basic tools, a hammer, nails, and a saw. The grocer, still suspicious but less harsh, noticed the change. "Looks like the mill is doing you good, widow," he commented, a tone of curiosity in his voice. "Hard work always does good, sir," Anna replied, keeping her voice neutral but with a subtle smile on her lips. Upon returning, the cart driver who had helped her with the stove was in the village. Anna hired him again, asking him to take the old planks from the mill to a carpenter in the village, with instructions to turn them into a simple, rustic table and 2 benches, without ornaments. "Tell him it's for the mill," Anna instructed, "and that I'm not in a hurry." The idea was for people to think she was using the mill's own old wood, which was partly true. The carpenter, known for his honest but slow work, wouldn't ask questions. In the following days, the mill continued its transformation. The scrape of the saw cutting planks, the tap of the hammer fixing nails, the rustle of fabric being cut and sewn for curtains. Each sound was a step towards a home. Anna taught her children to help, to collect branches, to mix the earth for the cracks. The children's laughter, once rare, now echoed through the stone walls, mingling with the cheerful crackle of the fire. The curtains, made of thick fabric, were hung in the few windows, blocking the wind and excessive light, creating a cozy atmosphere. The table and benches, rustic but sturdy, were delivered by the cart driver a few days later, the creak of the wheels announcing their arrival. Lunch that day, served at the new table, felt like a feast. The mill, once a monument to desolation, was becoming a refuge. The stone walls, once cold and hostile, now radiated a subtle warmth. The smell of mold and dust was being replaced by the aroma of burning wood and fresh bread. Anna felt the weight of the secret, but also the lightness of hope. She was no longer the humiliated widow. She was the architect of her own destiny, building stone by stone a future for her family. The wind outside continued to blow, but now Anna heard it as a hymn of freedom. The rhythmic crackle of the fire in the stove was the soundtrack to mornings at the mill. The soft light filtering through the newly hung curtains bathed the interior in a golden hue, and the air, once icy, was now a warm embrace. Anna watched her children sleep, their faces serene, and felt the weight of gratitude in her chest. Each day, the mill seemed to breathe more life, transforming from a desperate refuge into a welcoming home. With the basic needs of warmth and shelter minimally met, Anna turned her attention to food. Although she could buy provisions, the idea of growing her own vegetables brought a sense of security and self-sufficiency that money alone could not buy. The morning sun was already rising when she went out, the small axe and an improvised shovel in her hands. The ground around the mill was hard and unforgiving, the earth compacted by years of neglect. The scrape of the shovel against the dry soil was a constant sound as she worked, breaking clods and removing stones, preparing a small garden bed. Her children, awakened by the sound and curious about their mother's new endeavor, soon joined her. The eldest helped collect stones, while the youngest, with a small bucket, brought water from the nearby stream, the gurgle of the water echoing softly. Together, they planted the seeds of hardy vegetables Anna had bought: carrots, potatoes, cabbage. Each seed buried in the earth was a silent promise of a greener, more abundant future. It was arduous work, but the smell of fresh earth and the children's laughter mingled with the wind's whistle, creating a new symphony at the mill. While the seeds awaited rain and sun, Anna realized that her own clothes and those of her children were increasingly worn. She couldn't appear in the village in luxurious attire, but dignity demanded a minimum of decency. Using the thick fabric she had bought, she began to sew. The soft rustle of the fabric and the rhythmic click of the needle were the only sounds filling the mill on many afternoons. She mended her own clothes, transforming them into something more presentable, and made simple, durable clothes for the boys. When they put on the new garments, their eyes shone with restrained joy, the feel of the soft fabric against their skin, a small luxury they had not experienced in a long time. Her trips to the village became more frequent, but always discreet. She bought small items, never in large quantities, so as not to arouse suspicion. The grocer, once harsh, now greeted her with a less hostile grunt, the curiosity in his gaze more evident. Whispers still followed her, but Anna noticed that the tone had changed. There was less scorn and more a kind of reluctant admiration. On one of these visits, as the jingle of coins spread across the counter, Anna noticed a pile of dusty old books in a corner. "How much for this?" she asked, pointing to a small, worn storybook. The grocer raised an eyebrow. "Books? For the mill? Nobody wants that." Anna, however, insisted, paying a few copper coins. The rustle of its pages as they were opened was the sound of a new world unfolding for her children. The mill, once a monument to desolation, was becoming the epicenter of a silent revolution. The smell of mold and dust had been replaced by the aroma of fresh earth, wood smoke, and bread. The children's laughter, once rare, now echoed through the stone walls, mingling with the cheerful crackle of the fire. Anna felt the weight of the secret, but also the lightness of hope. She was no longer the humiliated widow. She was the architect of her own destiny, building, stone by stone, a future for her family. Each day, she felt that she was not just rebuilding a home, but weaving her children's future with threads of dignity and hope. The wind continued to blow against the stone walls, but now, instead of a lament, Anna heard in it the distant echo of a promise fulfilled. The promise of a new dawn filled the air of the mill, not just with light, but with the vibrant energy of hope. Anna woke to the laughter of her children, who were already leafing through the storybook she had bought, the rustle of the pages, a sweet, long-forgotten sound. That small volume, with its faded illustrations and dusty text, had become a portal to worlds of fantasy and knowledge, filling the mornings with the gentle cadence of Anna's reading voice and the boys' curious questions. As life nestled into the mill, Anna noticed that the seeds she had planted in the garden bed were beginning to sprout. small green points piercing the dark earth, a silent victory against the aridity of the past. The smell of wet earth mingled with the aroma of burning wood, and each day the mill seemed to breathe deeper. However, her restless mind sought the next step. The treasure was an invaluable security, but full dignity would come from visible work, from a reputation built with her own hands. Her eyes turned to the mill's rusted sails, motionless for years, a silent reminder of its original function. The idea of restoring it, of making it turn again, began to take shape in her mind. It wasn't an immediate need for income, but a statement, a way to prove that the mill was not just a home, but a place of production, of life. It would be a monumental project, but Anna felt it was time. She climbed the spiral staircase again, the creak of the wood now familiar. Upstairs, the mill's mechanisms lay in a tangle of rusted gears and seized shafts. The winds whistled through the open cracks, seemed to lament the state of neglect. Anna touched the metal parts, feeling the coldness of the iron and the roughness of the rust. It was a gigantic challenge, but she was driven by an iron determination. What she needed now was knowledge and more specific tools. On her next trip to the village, Anna sought out the blacksmith. The clang of the hammer against hot metal was the constant melody of his workshop, and the smell of smoke and iron hung in the air. The blacksmith, a large, taciturn man, looked up as she entered, veiled curiosity in his gaze. "Good morning, Master Blacksmith," Anna said, her voice calm and firm. "I need some advice. I'm thinking of trying to restore the mill's mechanisms. Do you understand gears and shafts?" The blacksmith dropped his hammer, the dry thud echoing in the workshop. "The mill? That thing's been idle for decades, widow. No one wants to touch it." There was a tone of skepticism, but also a flicker of interest. Anna explained that she was not in a hurry, that she wanted to understand the complexity of the machine. The blacksmith reluctantly agreed to go to the mill for an assessment for a small sum in coins. The jingle of the silver coins in his hand brought a small smile to his lips. 2 days later, the blacksmith arrived at the mill in his cart, the creak of the wheels breaking the morning silence. The boys, curious, watched from afar. The blacksmith spent hours examining the mechanisms, the creak of his tools and the scrape of metal against metal filling the air. He shook his head, muttering about broken parts and seized shafts. "It's years of work, widow, and it will cost a fortune," he concluded, the thud of his hammer back in the cart sealing his opinion. "I understand, Master Blacksmith," Anna replied, "but I don't give up easily. What would be the first step? Which parts are the most critical?" She questioned him with an intelligence that surprised him. He pointed to some large gears and a main shaft, completely corroded. Those would have to be forged from scratch, and the sails, the sails, they're rotten. The blacksmith, who expected to discourage her, found in Anna a determination he hadn't seen in a long time. He gave her a list of materials and a preliminary budget that made Anna swallow hard, even with the treasure at her disposal. Days turned into weeks. Anna continued her discreet trips to the village, buying not only food and seeds, but also small tools and materials the blacksmith had indicated, always in quantities that wouldn't attract attention. The grocer now greeted her with a nod and a genuine smile, and the whispers in the village had turned into open conversations about the widow of the mill who is trying to fix the impossible. Some laughed, others admired her stubbornness, but no one despised her anymore. At the mill, Anna's children flourished. Their laughter, once a rare sound, now echoed freely through the stone walls. They helped tend the garden, whose first lettuce leaves and radishes could already be harvested, the crunch of fresh leaves a delight to the palate. Anna taught them to read with the storybook, the words coming alive under her fingers. Each day, Anna felt that she was not just rebuilding a home, but weaving her children's future with threads of dignity and hope. The mill, once a symbol of desolation, was becoming a beacon of hope, not only for Anna and her children, but subtly and increasingly for the village itself, which watched, curious, the resurrection of that forgotten place. Anna's determination, firm as the stones she herself had mended, was the silent force that propelled each new morning, promising a future where humiliation would be just a distant shadow. The promise of a new dawn filled the air of the mill, not just with light, but with the vibrant energy of hope. Anna knew that the journey to restore the mill would be long and arduous, but each day her determination solidified. She spent hours studying the ancient documents she had found, discovering blueprints and diagrams of the original mill. The rustle of aged paper as she turned the pages was the sound of rediscovered knowledge, revealing the secrets of that complex machine. On her next visit to the blacksmith, Anna didn't just ask for advice. She brought with her a small drawing she had copied from one of the documents, showing one of the main gears, corroded and broken. The blacksmith, who had once viewed her with skepticism, now observed her with deeper curiosity. The clang of the hammer in his workshop ceased for a moment as he examined the drawing. "This piece is complex, widow," he said, his voice hoarse. "It will require time and quality material, and a considerable cost." Anna, her voice firm, proposed an agreement. She would pay a portion up front, and the rest in installments as the work progressed. The blacksmith, accustomed to clients who paid all at once or gave up, was intrigued. Each week, Anna appeared with the promised coins, always in amounts that seemed to be the result of arduous savings, not a hidden treasure. The sound of silver coins falling into the blacksmith's palm was a constant reminder of her commitment. While the blacksmith worked on the new gears, the sound of metal being forged echoed through the village, a sound that had not been heard in a long time. Anna, in turn, dedicated herself to cleaning and repairing the mill's internal mechanisms. The scrape of wire brushes against rusted iron was constant, followed by the jingle of small parts she disassembled and carefully lubricated with oil she had discreetly purchased. The boys, fascinated, watched their mother. The eldest, with a damp cloth, helped clean the smaller parts, while the youngest brought the tools Anna asked for, the click of metal against metal a fun game for him. The first harvests from the garden were a success. The crunch of lettuce leaves and the sweet taste of radishes were tangible proof of her effort. Anna sold the surplus in the village, always in small quantities, the jingle of copper coins, a sound that justified her larger purchases from the blacksmith. "The widow is making her way," the neighbors commented, the tone of disdain replaced by one of reluctant respect. Finally, after weeks of arduous work, the blacksmith delivered the first large gear. The polished, gleaming metal, still smelling of forge smoke, was a work of art. The thud of the metal piece as it was placed on the mill floor was a sound of victory. Anna, with the blacksmith's help, began the installation work. The creak and groan of the metal as the gear was fitted were sounds of a mechanical body awakening from a long sleep. The blacksmith, once so skeptical, began to offer advice without Anna needing to ask, his grave, experienced voice guiding her. "Now, the main shaft," he said, pointing to the massive corroded structure, "that will require more strength, and the sails, the sails, they're rotten." The mention of the carpenter brought a new challenge. Anna needed someone who worked with wood on a large scale, but without raising suspicion. She remembered a retired carpenter who lived in the hills, a reclusive man, known for his skill, but also for his distrust. On her next trip, she ventured beyond the village, the creak of her cart echoing down the dirt road. Upon arriving at the carpenter's cabin, the smell of freshly cut wood hung in the air, even with the workshop silent. Anna explained her intention, showing the drawings of the sails she had found in the documents. The old carpenter, with his gnarled hands and piercing eyes, examined the drawings. He didn't say a word for a long time, only the crackle of wood in the fireplace breaking the silence. "It's a master's work, widow," he finally said, his voice as hoarse as the blacksmith's, "and the right trees are hard to find." Anna proposed the same agreement, payment in installments, with the promise of quality wood. The carpenter, who hadn't received such a challenging project in years, felt the flame of passion ignite again in his tired eyes. The rustle of the silver coins Anna placed in his hand was a sound of a new beginning. Back at the mill, the days were filled with the sound of work. The scrape of metal, the gentle hammering, the smell of oil and wood. Anna's children, growing up amidst this symphony of reconstruction, not only learned to read and tend the garden, but also the complexity of mechanics and persistence. The mill, once a symbol of abandonment, now hummed with the energy of renewed life, a beacon of hope that began to turn, slowly, on the village's horizon. With each new piece installed, with each new sound of progress, Anna felt that she was not just fixing a machine, but rewriting her family's history, stone by stone, gear by gear. The wind, which once mocked, now seemed to whisper a melody of admiration. The whisper of the wind, which once seemed to mock, now carried with it the promise of a melody of admiration. Anna returned to the mill with a lighter heart, but her mind full of new challenges. The carpenter from the hills, a man of few words, had accepted the work on the sails, and each day the smell of fresh wood began to mingle with the aroma of damp earth emanating from the garden. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Anna divided her time between working at the mill and discreet trips. The blacksmith, motivated by Anna's determination and punctual payments, dedicated himself to the main shaft. The clang of the hammer against incandescent iron echoed through the workshop in the village, a powerful sound announcing the forging of a monumental piece. Anna, on her visits, saw the raw metal taking shape, the hiss of steam as the piece was cooled, and the strong smell of hot metal filled the air. At the mill, Anna continued her cleaning and repair work. The scrape of wire brushes against rust was incessant, and the jingle of small parts she meticulously disassembled and lubricated was the soundtrack to her day. Her children, now older and stronger, helped with enthusiasm. The eldest, with a damp cloth, polished the parts their mother had already cleaned, while the youngest carried small tools, the click of metal in his hands, a fun game. Their laughter filled the space, a sound that, for Anna, was worth more than any treasure. Meanwhile, in the hills, the retired carpenter, whose gnarled hands seemed to have a life of their own, immersed himself in the task of the sails. The whine of the saw tearing through wood, the rhythmic thud of the chisel carving shapes, the sweet smell of resin and sawdust hung in his workshop. He had chosen the most resilient trees, whose woods were known for their durability. Anna made regular visits, bringing the promised installments and observing the progress. The carpenter, who initially barely looked at her, began to share technical details, his hoarse voice revealing a growing pride in his work. "These will be the strongest sails this region has ever seen," he said, the thud of his hand on the solid wood sealing the promise. The garden, under the care of the boys and Anna, prospered. The crisp lettuce leaves and the sweet taste of radishes were harvested daily. The surplus was sold in the village. The jingle of copper coins in Anna's hands was the sound of a growing economy, justifying her larger purchases. The neighbors, who once scoffed, now greeted her with a respectful nod. Some even stopped to ask about the mill, curiosity replacing indifference. "The widow is really making it happen," they commented, their tone of voice laden with reluctant respect. Finally, the day for the delivery of the main shaft arrived. The blacksmith, with the help of 2 strong men from the village, brought the piece in a sturdy cart, the creak of the wheels under the heavy weight echoing down the dirt road. The polished metal of the shaft gleamed under the sun, a masterpiece of engineering and strength. The dull thud of the piece as it was placed on the mill floor made the structure tremble. Anna, with the help of the blacksmith and the men, began the installation work. The creak and groan of the metal, as the shaft was carefully fitted into place, were sounds of a mechanical heart beating again. The blacksmith, who had once doubted, now guided Anna with surprising dedication, his grave, experienced voice dictating every movement. The installation of the main shaft was a milestone. The mill, now with its backbone restored, seemed to rise with new dignity. But the sight of the sails, still absent, was a reminder of the work that remained. Anna knew that the next stage would be even grander, to raise the enormous wooden sails, which would soon arrive from the hills, so that the mill could finally embrace the wind. The rustle of the wind through the cracks, which once seemed like a lament, now carried with it a vibrant anticipation, a song of hope spreading through the valley. The rustle of the wind through the mill's cracks, which once seemed like a lament, now carried with it a vibrant anticipation. The installation of the main shaft had transformed the interior of the stone structure. The polished metal gleamed under the sun's rays that filtered through the openings, and the smell of oil and new iron mingled with the aroma of damp earth. The blacksmith, with his calloused hands, had guided Anna and the two village men with precision. The dull thud of the piece settling into its final place made the floor vibrate. The creak and groan of the metal as the massive bolts were tightened were the sounds of a mechanical body awakening from a long sleep, its backbone restored. With the main shaft firmly in place, Anna's attention turned to the sails. She knew that the next stage would be even grander, raising those enormous wooden structures. On her next trip to the hills, the creak of her cart was accompanied by restrained excitement. The retired carpenter awaited her with a rare smile on his lips. The smell of freshly cut wood, resin, and sawdust was intense in the workshop. There, leaning against the walls, were the 4 massive sails, each a masterpiece of skill and strength. The carpenter had chosen the most resilient woods, whose fibers intertwined with the promise of durability. The thud of his hand on the solid wood resonated in the workshop, a gesture of pride. "They are ready, widow," he said, his voice hoarse but laden with satisfaction. "These sails will withstand any wind." The challenge now was to transport them. The sails were too large for Anna's cart. The carpenter, noticing her concern, offered a solution. He knew some strong men in the neighboring village accustomed to moving heavy logs. Anna agreed, and the rustle of silver coins in her hand sealed the deal. News of the transport spread quickly. On the appointed day, the dragging of heavy timbers along the dirt road, pulled by strong oxen, was a spectacle. The lowing of the animals and the shouts of the men guiding them were the sounds of the sail's imminent arrival. The curious villagers gathered by the roadside, watching the procession. The murmur of voices was loud, and the respect in their gazes was palpable. At the mill, Anna and the blacksmith had prepared the ground. The blacksmith had forged additional hooks and supports, the clang of his hammer echoing through the structure. Anna's children, now taller and with more developed muscles, helped clean and organize the tools, the click of metal in their hands a familiar sound. They had grown up amidst this symphony of reconstruction, learning about mechanics, persistence, and their mother's quiet strength. The eldest, with a gleam in his eyes, studied the blueprints with the same seriousness as an adult, while the youngest ran, each step an echo of energy and joy. The arrival of the sails at the mill was a moment of triumph. The dull thud of the wood as it was carefully placed on the ground, one by one, was a sound of promise fulfilled. The sweet smell of resin and sawdust filled the air, mingling with the smell of iron and earth. The installation would be the climax of months of work. The blacksmith, with his grave, experienced voice, explained the complexity of the hoisting. "We will need winches and a lot of coordination, widow," he said, pointing to the wooden and metal structures he and Anna had assembled. It's a job that will require everyone's help. Anna knew it was time to reveal a little more of her capability. She had paid the carpenter's men generously, and they, impressed by the widow's determination, agreed to help with the installation of the sails. The next day, a small crowd gathered at the mill. The carpenter's men, the blacksmith, the two men who helped with the shaft, and even some curious neighbors who came to observe and, perhaps, offer a hand. The creak of ropes and the groan of winches mingled with the sound of voices as the first sail was slowly hoisted. Sweat streamed down faces and muscles tensed. With a joint effort and the blacksmith's precise guidance, the first sail was fitted. The metallic click of its engagement was followed by a collective sigh of relief and admiration. One by one, the sails joined the structure, transforming the mill from a ruin into an imposing machine. The afternoon sun painted the sails a soft gold, and the wind, which once mocked, now seemed to whisper a melody of admiration. The last sail was fixed with a final thud, and the silence that followed was filled only by the rustle of the wind in its new wooden wings. The mill was complete. Anna looked at the imposing structure, her heart pounding. That mill, which everyone saw as a punishment, was now ready to embrace the wind and turn, not just grain, but the wheel of her family's fortune. The murmur of the crowd turned into applause, a sound of respect and recognition that echoed through the valley. The applause, a sound of respect and recognition that echoed through the valley, was music to Anna's ears. She felt the warmth of the sun on her skin and the wind in her hair, a wind that now seemed like a blessing, not a curse. Her children, their eyes wide with admiration, hugged her legs, their laughter mingling with the murmur of the crowd. The blacksmith and the carpenter, with wide, satisfied smiles, shook her hand, a silent acknowledgement of her strength and vision. The silence gave way to a new kind of expectation. Anna ascended the few steps to the mill's entrance, her children close behind. The interior, once a chaos of tools and wood, was now clean and organized. The main shaft, massive and gleaming, awaited. With a nod to the blacksmith who stood by the engagement lever, Anna gave the signal. The blacksmith pulled the lever with a dull thud, and a deep creak echoed through the structure. Outside, the sails, once motionless, began to move. First, a slow, hesitant turn, then, gaining rhythm, the rustle of the wind on their enormous wooden surfaces transformed into a constant hum. The mill was alive. A murmur of admiration spread through the crowd outside. The neighbors pointed, their voices filled with awe. Inside, Anna felt a subtle vibration in the floor beneath her feet. The sound of the internal mechanism, a soft growl of gears engaging, filled the space. She approached the hopper, where the blacksmith had poured a handful of wheat grains, the first to be processed. The jingle of the grains falling into the hopper was followed by the rhythmic sound of the grinding stone. A sweet, earthy, unmistakable smell began to emanate from the chute, fresh flour. Anna's children ran to the chute, watching the fine white flour pour into a linen sack. The youngest plunged his hand in, feeling the soft, warm texture, and let out a cry of joy. The eldest, with a proud smile, looked at his mother, his eyes reflecting the same determination she had shown. That moment, with the smell of flour in the air and the constant sound of the mill working, was the realization of a dream, tangible proof of her resilience. The following weeks were filled with arduous and gratifying work. Anna's mill became a landmark. The creak of the sails in the wind and the soft sound of grinding were now part of the valley's soundscape. Sacks of flour, white and heavy, began to accumulate. Anna set fair prices, slightly below those of more distant mills, and the quality of her flour was undeniable. The smell of fresh bread baked in the village, made with the mill's flour, was a testament to her success. The neighbors who once avoided the mill now queued, their carts laden with grain. The jingle of silver and gold coins in Anna's hands was a constant sound, an echo of her growing prosperity. She paid the blacksmith and carpenter generously for their continuous maintenance and adjustment services, ensuring the mill ran perfectly. The laughter of her children, now well-fed and in new clothes, was the most precious sound of all. They helped carry sacks, clean the mill, and the eldest even began to learn the rudiments of mechanics with the blacksmith. The click of tools in his hands, a sign of his interest. News of the widow's mill spread beyond the valley. It reached the ears of the powerful in the city, those who had humiliated her. The Baron, a corpulent man with cold eyes, heard the reports with sour disbelief. "That wretched woman," he growled, his voice laden with contempt, as he slammed his fist on the oak table. "Impossible. She couldn't possibly have prospered." He ordered one of his henchmen, a cunning and unscrupulous man, to investigate. The jingle of coins the Baron threw on the table was a promise of trouble. Anna, for her part, was vigilant. She had invested part of her treasure in security, reinforcing the mill's doors and windows and installing a simple but effective alarm system of bells and ropes. The bark of a newly acquired guard dog, a loyal and imposing mastiff, added another layer of protection. She knew that success would bring envy and greed. As the mill turned, a constant hum of prosperity, Anna felt a premonition. Peace was sweet, but fragile. She had rebuilt her life, but the shadow of the past still lurked, and the wind, which once brought hope, now seemed to whisper warnings that the battle for dignity was far from over. The Baron's henchman, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes, arrived in the valley riding a dark horse, the trot of hooves on the dirt road raising small clouds of dust. The jingle of his spurs was the only sound breaking the morning silence, and his presence, an air of menace, spread even before he uttered a word. He did not go directly to the mill, but to the village tavern, a place where tongues loosened with the warmth of wine and the promise of a few coins. The henchman ordered a mug of dark ale, the thud of the mug on the rustic wooden table drawing the attention of the few patrons. His eyes swept the room, settling on a group of farmers discussing the harvest. With a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, he began to ask questions about the widow's mill. He wanted to know how that woman, who everyone knew had been expelled and humiliated, had achieved such prosperity. The jingle of a few copper coins on the table made the farmers' voices subside. At first, the men hesitated. Loyalty to Anna had grown with each sack of fair flour and every kind gesture. One of them, a grey-bearded man, coughed, the hoarse sound filling the brief silence. "She worked hard, sir. She's a woman of grit." Others nodded, a murmur of approval echoing. But the henchman was persistent, his questions becoming more incisive, his voice deeper, his tone more threatening. He insinuated that Anna's wealth could only come from illicit means, perhaps theft, perhaps dark pacts. With each insinuation, the silence in the tavern grew heavier. The villagers, though grateful to Anna, knew the Baron's power and the danger of defying him. The jingle of a silver coin thrown disdainfully on the table made one of the younger men, wide-eyed, stammer about the story of the abandoned mill, Anna's arrival, and how, out of nowhere, the mill began to turn. He didn't mention the treasure, of course, but the story of Anna's meteoric rise, without a clear explanation, was exactly what the henchman needed to fuel the Baron's suspicions. At the mill, the atmosphere was tense. The mastiff, Lobo, an imposing dog with fur as dark as night, growled low, his ears erect, pointing towards the valley. Lobo's deep growl was a clear warning. Anna, who was reviewing the flower stalks, felt a chill down her spine. She knew that peace was fragile, and the dog's behavior confirmed her fears. Her children, accustomed to the mill's serenity, noticed the change. The youngest huddled close to his mother, while the eldest, with a worried look, asked, "What is it, mother? "Lobo is acting strange." Anna stroked the dog's head, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Just an unwelcome visitor, my son, but we are prepared." She had taught her children the importance of vigilance. The solid wooden doors were locked, the windows reinforced. The system of bells and ropes, installed by her and the blacksmith, was active. Any attempt at intrusion would create a shrill noise that would echo throughout the mill. The soft click of the mill's gears, which was once a sound of comfort, now seemed like a drum beating in Anna's chest, accelerating her heart. That night, the henchman approached the mill. The wind whistled through the sails, a ghostly sound in the darkness. He tested the main door, feeling the solidity of the wood under his fingers. Lobo's furious bark, coming from within, made him step back. The dog's growl was fierce, and the henchman realized that the widow was not unprotected. He circled the mill, looking for a weakness. The windows were tightly shut. The stones of the walls, once crumbling, now seemed unshakable. He noticed the bells hanging, barely visible in the darkness, and the metallic glint of a simple but effective trap that the blacksmith had helped install near one of the smaller accesses. Frustrated, the henchman retreated into the darkness of the nearby forest, his eyes fixed on the mill, which seemed like a fortress under the moonlight. He knew he would need more than simple questions and a night raid. The Baron wanted answers, and he would get them, whatever the cost. The rustle of leaves under his feet was the only sound as he walked away, the promise of a more aggressive return hanging in the air. Inside the mill, Anna watched through the window crack. The henchman's retreating figure was almost imperceptible, but Lobo continued to growl softly, the deep sound echoing in the interior silence. Anna knew that this was just the beginning. Peace was sweet, but the shadow of greed and envy was long. She squeezed her eldest son's hand, who stood beside her, feeling the strength in his fingers. The battle for dignity was far from over, and Anna was ready to fight. The constant hum of the mill, which never stopped, was the sound of her resilience. A silent challenge to those who tried to bring her down. The henchman's shadow dissolved into the darkness of the forest, but the promise of a more aggressive return hung in the air like the smell of smoke after a fire. He rode back to the city, the trot of his horse echoing on the empty road, the only sound accompanying his frustrated thoughts. Upon reaching the Baron's castle, the massive oak door creaked open, revealing a torchlit hall where the Baron waited, his corpulent figure casting a menacing shadow. The Baron listened to the henchman's report with disbelief that quickly turned to fury. The thud of his fist on the wooden table made the goblets clink. "Impossible!" he roared, his deep voice echoing through the walls. "That wretched woman defying me! She cannot possibly have the resources for such security." The sound of his indignation reverberated through the hall, making the nearest servants flinch. The henchman, head bowed, explained about the fierce dog and the unexpected defenses. The Baron's eyes gleamed with wicked cunning. "If she doesn't fear force, she will fear the law," he murmured, a cruel smile forming on his lips. He summoned his scribes and counselors. The rustle of parchments and the scratching of quills filled the Baron's chambers late into the night. He ordered a formal accusation to be prepared. The widow Anna would be charged with trespassing and possessing goods of illicit origin. The mill's land, he argued, had always belonged to his family, and Anna's wealth could only be the result of theft or sorcery, as a woman without means could not prosper so quickly. The jingle of gold coins was the reward promised to anyone who could prove the accusations. In the valley, news of the Baron's fury and intentions spread like wildfire. This time, however, it was not a murmur of fear, but a buzz of expectation and indignation. The villagers, who had witnessed Anna's dignity and the mill's rebirth, felt the injustice in the air. The grey-bearded farmer and his friends mobilized, knocking on doors, gathering testimonies, reminding everyone of Anna's generosity and the mill's history. The jingle of the Baron's gold coins no longer held the same weight. Anna's fresh flour and warm bread had nourished not only their bodies, but also the hope in their hearts. At the mill, Anna prepared herself. She was not alone. The blacksmith, the carpenter, and now even an old village scribe, who had been marginalized by the Baron, offered their help. The scribe, with his precise calligraphy, helped Anna organize the ancestral documents, identifying seals and dates, preparing an irrefutable defense. The sound of the quill scratching on the parchment was the melody of truth being meticulously organized. Anna used a small part of her treasure to ensure that the villagers who would testify would not suffer immediate reprisals, offering a support fund for their families. The day of the trial arrived. The central square of the village was packed. The Baron, seated on a raised platform, displayed an arrogant smile, flanked by his counselors and a judge who owed him favors. The silence was tense, broken only by the rustle of the guards' robes and the caw of a crow on a nearby rooftop. Anna entered the square, her children holding her hands, Lobo walking proudly by her side, a low, continuous growl in his throat. She wore simple clothes, but her presence was more imposing than the Baron's. The henchman began the accusations, his voice deep and full of venom, describing Anna as an impostor, a thief, a woman who deceived everyone. He tried to disqualify the documents as forgeries. When it was Anna's turn, she stepped forward. The sound of her footsteps was firm on the packed earth. She did not shout, she did not beg. Calmly, she held up the ancestral documents, their ancient seals and faded signatures visible to all. These are the proofs of my lineage, of my family's possession of this land for generations. This mill, the Mill of Hope, was left to us by an ancestor who foresaw injustice, she declared, her voice clear and resonant. And this map, she unrolled an even older parchment, shows not only the property boundaries, but also the exact location of the treasure the Baron covets, a treasure that is not stolen, but an inheritance for my children's dignity. A murmur of astonishment swept through the crowd. The Baron, once so confident, began to sweat coldly, the sound of his heavy breathing audible to those nearest. Then the grey-bearded farmer stepped forward. I bear witness. I know the history of this mill. My grandfather worked here. It has always belonged to Anna's family. Other villagers stood up, a chorus of voices joining in support. She fed us. She brought hope. The mill was reborn by her hands. The village scribe, with Anna's permission, presented an additional document, a copy of an ancient land registry which, to everyone's surprise, confirmed Anna's lineage and ownership of the mill, a record the Baron had tried to suppress. The sound of the parchment unrolling was like the unfolding of a long-hidden truth. The judge, feeling the pressure of the crowd and the irrefutability of the evidence, hesitated. The Baron tried to intervene, his voice now a furious growl, but the chorus of villagers silenced him. The jingle of coins he had offered to buy witnesses now seemed a distant, pathetic echo. The decision was announced. The mill and the adjacent lands were, by right, Anna's. The accusations against her were withdrawn. The Baron, publicly humiliated, saw his power crumble. Truth, supported by the community and the documents, had prevailed. The sound of the judge's gavel striking the wood was the sound of justice finally served. In the days that followed, the Baron, weakened and discredited, was forced to retreat. His influence over the valley drastically diminished, and many of his former allies began to distance themselves. Anna, now not just a dignified widow, but a respected and powerful figure, dedicated herself to rebuilding not only her home, but also the community. The Mill of Hope, with its sails turning in the wind, became a beacon of prosperity and justice. The flour it produced fed everyone, and the ancestral wealth was used for the well-being of the valley, building a school for the children and helping those most in need. The laughter of Anna's children echoed through the mill, a sound of pure joy. Lobo, the mastiff, slept peacefully in the sun, his guard duty finally less urgent. Anna, looking at the valley flourishing under her care, felt the lightness of a burden lifted. The sound of the wind in the mill's sails was now a song of peace and gratitude, a constant reminder that even in the most desolate places, hope, truth, and love can build a prosperous and dignified future. The mill, which had once been a symbol of desolation, was now the pulsating heart of a valley that had found its own wealth in the resilience of one woman.